I sat on the edge of the bed with the door open, my feet barely touching the floor, and listened to the apartment breathe. The hallway light spilled into the bedroom like it didn't know it was crossing a line. I could hear the low hum of the refrigerator, the distant traffic below, the soft tick of the clock we'd bought together. And somewhere beyond the thin wall, I knew my husband was home. Not asleep. Not gone. Just there. That was the part that made my pulse stumble. I hadn't planned it this way. I hadn't planned anything, really. But when the door stayed open when I didn't get up to close it, I realized I was making a choice. Or maybe refusing to make one. I smoothed my hands over my thighs, more to steady myself than for any other reason, and felt the warmth lingering in my skin. The room felt smaller than it should have, like the air was holding its breath with me. He was here. Sitting on the other side of the room, close enough that I could hear the shift of his weight, the quiet way he said my name. Not loudly. Not boldly. Almost like a secret he wasn't sure he should keep. I should have stood up. I should have walked to the door, shut it gently, pretended this was just another night in a marriage built on routines and shared grocery lists. I even leaned forward once, as if my body might do the right thing on its own. Instead, I stayed exactly where I was. The mattress dipped beneath me, a familiar ache pressing into my palms. My heart beat so loudly I wondered if it could carry down the hall. I told myself I was just sitting, just listening, just waiting for the moment to pass. But the truth was heavier than that. I wanted him to know I hadn't closed the door. I wanted him to hear the silence between us and feel the risk humming inside it. I wanted to see how far that quiet could stretch before something broke. When he whispered my name again, closer this time, I didn't answer. I just inhaled slowly and stayed on the edge. I keep replaying the moment earlier that evening, trying to understand when everything shifted. It wasn't a dramatic scene. No argument. No slammed doors. Just an ordinary night that softened into something dangerous. My husband had come home tired, kissed my cheek out of habit, asked what I wanted for dinner. His voice had been kind, familiar, safe, and somehow that made the rest of it hurt more. Because later, after the dishes, after the quiet settled, he texted me from the other room. "Are you awake?" 2 words. Nothing more. I stared at my phone for a long time before answering. I told myself it was harmless. That we'd talked like this before. Always stopping just short of where we weren't supposed to go. That I could control it. That I still remembered how to choose the right thing. But control feels different when you're lonely in ways you can't explain to the person sleeping beside you every night. I told him yes. That's when he came closer. Not into the room. Just closer enough that I could feel his presence through the wall. Close enough that silence became charged. Close enough that my body responded before my mind could catch up. I remember sitting down on the bed because my knees suddenly felt weak. I remember thinking about how strange it was to feel this alive while everything else in my life felt so carefully managed. My marriage wasn't broken. That's what makes this harder to admit. It was functional, predictable, loving in a quiet, almost invisible way. But this was loud inside me. Every whisper from the other side of the room landed like a touch. Every pause felt intentional. I imagined his eyes on the open doorway, wondering if I'd close it. Wondering if I wanted him to notice that I hadn't. Guilt pressed into my chest, thick and heavy. I told myself I could still stand up. I could still choose the version of myself I recognized. Instead, I shifted slightly on the mattress and waited. The silence stretched thin as a wire. And I knew I was standing on the edge of something I wouldn't be able to unfeel. The thing no one tells you about moments like this is how slow they are. Nothing happened all at once. There was no sudden step across a line. Just a series of seconds that felt heavier than they should have. Each one asking me a question I was afraid to answer. I could hear him breathing now. Not loud, just present. A quiet reminder that he was close enough to reach me if I let him. My skin reacted to that awareness. A faint shiver tracing my arms, my spine, settling low in my stomach where heat had already begun to gather. I told myself to think of my husband, of the way he'd wrapped an arm around me earlier, half asleep, trusting without knowing why. The thought should have stopped me. Instead, it made my throat tighten. I pressed my toes into the floor, grounding myself, and stared at the open doorway. The darkness beyond it felt thick, like it was watching us. like it knew exactly how fragile my resolve was. I wondered if he could see the outline of me from where he stood. My shoulders tense, my back straight, my hands gripping the edge of the bed as if it might slide out from under me. "Just tell me to go," he murmured. His voice was careful, not demanding, almost gentle. That was what undid me. He was giving me an out, and somehow that made the wanting louder. My lips parted, but no sound came. I shook my head once, even though I knew he might not see it. The silence that followed felt intentional, intimate, like a shared inhale. I felt his presence shift closer to the doorway, close enough that the air between us changed. My body leaned forward before I noticed it happening, drawn by instinct instead of reason. Every part of me was awake now, listening, anticipating, aching. I wasn't pretending anymore. I was choosing the risk. And as my heart hammered against my ribs, I realized something that terrified me more than being discovered. I didn't want this moment to end. He stepped into the doorway without announcing himself. Not fully into the room, just enough that his shadow crossed the floor and touched my feet. That small intrusion felt louder than any sound. My breath caught, shallow and uneven, and I hated how obvious it probably was. How my body betrayed me before I ever spoke. I didn't turn around right away. I couldn't. The weight of his attention pressed against my back, warm and unmistakable. I felt seen in a way that made my chest tighten, not exposed exactly but known. Like he understood what it cost me to still be sitting there. "You didn't close it," he said softly. It wasn't an accusation, more like an observation. A careful naming of the thing neither of us wanted to say out loud. I swallowed, my fingers curling tighter into the edge of the mattress. The fabric beneath my hands felt suddenly important, something solid to hold on to while everything else threatened to tilt. "I thought about it," I admitted. The honesty surprised me. It slipped out before I could soften it, before I could turn it into something safer. The words hung between us, fragile and dangerous. I felt him shift again, closer now, the space behind me warming as if the air itself had changed its mind. I could hear his breath when he spoke. "And?" I closed my eyes. The answer lived in my body long before it reached my mouth. It was in the way my shoulders loosened when he stood there. In the way my knees parted just a little, instinctively, without permission. In the quiet ache that had settled so deep it felt permanent. "I'm still thinking," I whispered. That was the lie. Or maybe it was the last thin thread of denial I was holding on to. He didn't touch me. That was the cruelest part. He let the moment stretch, let the tension bloom unchecked. My heartbeat thundered in my ears, each pulse a reminder of how close I was to something irreversible. I felt his presence dip, as if he'd leaned closer, enough that I could feel warmth brush the back of my arm. My skin reacted instantly, goosebumps racing upward, my breath stuttering. And in that suspended second, with my husband just a room away and this other truth standing behind me, I realized how badly I wanted to turn around. I turned around. I wish I could say it was slow and graceful, like I was still in control of myself. It wasn't. It was instinct. A quiet surrender to gravity. When I faced him, the hallway light traced the outline of his jaw, the curve of his mouth. His eyes were darker than usual, searching mine like he was waiting for a signal. Not permission exactly, something deeper than that. A confirmation that I understood what this meant. The door was still open behind him. That detail pulsed in my chest like a warning light. For a second, neither of us moved. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears, the soft friction of fabric when he shifted his weight. He wasn't touching me. He wasn't even that close. And yet the air between us felt thick, charged, almost electric. "You can still tell me to leave," he said again, quieter this time. My lips parted, but what came out wasn't a command. "Do you want to?" I asked. The question hovered between us, fragile and honest. His throat moved as he swallowed, and that tiny motion sent heat spiraling through me. He didn't answer right away. He stepped forward instead. One step. That was all it took. Now he was close enough that I could feel warmth radiating from him. Close enough that the faint scent of his skin wrapped around me. My hands tightened against the mattress again, but this time it wasn't to hold myself back. It was to keep from reaching for him too quickly. I was hyper-aware of everything. How exposed I felt sitting there. How the open doorway framed us like a secret daring to be discovered. My husband could walk past at any moment, could clear his throat, could call my name, and still, I didn't move away. His fingers hovered near my knee, not touching, just close enough that my skin reacted as if they already had. A tremor moved through me, subtle but undeniable. He noticed. Of course he did. "That's not pretending," he murmured. He was right. Pretending would have been easier, safer. But this was a conscious risk. A choice I was making with my eyes open and my pulse racing. I lifted my gaze to his and let the silence answer for me. And when his fingers finally brushed my skin, just barely, the room seemed to tilt. The first touch was almost nothing. Just the lightest brush of his fingers against my knee, so brief it could have been accidental. But my body reacted instantly like it had been waiting for that exact permission. My breath hitched sharp and quiet, and I hated how easily he noticed. He didn't move his hand away. Instead, he let it rest there, warm and steady, as if he were anchoring himself to the moment. I felt the contrast between us, me perched on the edge of the bed, heart racing, and him standing there with that careful stillness, like he knew this wasn't something to rush. The open door loomed behind him, a constant reminder. Every sound from the apartment made my muscles tense. A floorboard creak, the faint clink of something in the kitchen, my husband shifting in his chair. Reality pressing in. "This is real," I whispered, more to myself than to him. He nodded once. "I know." That acknowledgement sent a wave through me. Fear and desire tangled so tightly, I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. I slid my hand from the mattress to his wrist, barely touching, just enough to feel the steady pulse beneath his skin. The intimacy of that simple contact made my chest ache. He leaned down slightly, bringing his face closer to mine, not close enough to cross that final line, but enough that I could feel his breath on my cheek. It was warm, unhurried, patient, like he was letting me decide how far this went. My thoughts scattered. All I could focus on was how near he was, how my body tilted toward him without permission, how my husband was still just a room away. Unaware of how fragile everything suddenly felt, I should have pulled back. Instead, I tightened my fingers around his wrist. The silence between us thickened, heavy with everything we weren't saying. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure it could be heard through the walls. And in that suspended second, balance between guilt and longing, I realized there was no going back to the person I was before I sat on that bed. Not after this. The moment stretched until it felt unreal, like time had slowed just to watch us decide who we were about to become. His wrist was warm beneath my fingers. Steady. Real. I focused on that sensation because it was easier than thinking about the door, the hallway, the life humming just beyond it. Easier than thinking about how my name could be called at any second, shattering everything. "You're shaking," he said quietly. I hadn't noticed. But once he said it, I felt it. An unsteady trembling low in my body, the kind that comes from holding something in for too long. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been keeping, and my grip on him tightened just enough to admit the truth. "I'm scared," I whispered. His eyes softened. Not triumphant. Not hungry. Just present. That made it worse. That made it intimate in a way that had nothing to do with touch. "So am I," he said. The honesty between us felt like another line crossed. He shifted closer slowly, giving me every chance to pull away. His hand slid from my knee to my thigh, still gentle, still restrained. The heat of it sank through fabric and straight into my pulse. I felt myself lean into the contact before my mind could argue. My hand moved on its own, sliding up his arm, feeling muscle tense beneath my touch. The simple act sent a rush through me, electric, grounding, terrifying. This wasn't fantasy anymore. This was choice. We were close enough now that our foreheads nearly touched. I could see the tiny changes in his expression, the way his breath deepened in response to mine. The silence was loud, heavy with awareness. Then a sound from the other room, a chair scraping softly against the floor. I froze. Every muscle in my body locked, my heart slamming so hard it almost hurt. His hand stilled instantly, as if we were both listening for the same thing. For footsteps. For a voice. Nothing came. Just the quiet again. He didn't pull away. Neither did I. But something had shifted. The risk was no longer abstract. It was immediate. Tangible. I met his eyes, and in that look was everything: fear, desire, guilt, longing, all colliding at once. "Tell me," he murmured, barely audible. "What do you want?" The answer burned in my chest, heavy and undeniable. And I knew whatever I said next would change everything. I didn't answer him right away. I looked past his shoulder instead. At the open door, the strip of hallway light, the life waiting just a few steps away. My husband's presence felt heavier now, no longer abstract. He was real. He was close. And I was sitting here, balanced between two truths, neither of them gentle. My chest rose and fell unevenly. I could feel my pulse everywhere. My throat, my wrists, the place where his hand still rested, warm and patient. He wasn't pushing. He wasn't asking again. He was letting me sit inside the question. "What I want," I said slowly, my voice barely holding together, "is to feel chosen." The words surprised me with their honesty. They landed between us and stayed there, undeniable. I felt his thumb move, just a fraction, a subtle acknowledgement rather than a claim. My body responded anyway, leaning into the contact like it had been waiting to be understood. "You are," he said. Soft. Certain. That was the moment everything tipped. I stood up, not away from him but closer. The edge of the bed pressed into the back of my knees, grounding me as I closed the space between us. Our foreheads touched, a quiet collision that felt more intimate than anything else could have. I closed my eyes, breathing him in, letting the warmth and the risk and the guilt exist all at once. For a heartbeat I considered stopping, pulling back, choosing the door. Instead, I lifted my face and let my lips brush his, brief, restrained but unmistakably real. The contact sent a shudder through me, sharp and immediate, like something inside me had finally exhaled. We broke apart just as quickly, both of us breathing hard, eyes wide with what we'd done and what we hadn't dared to do more of. I stepped back first. He didn't follow. The door stayed open. The apartment stayed quiet. And I stood there, heart racing, knowing nothing had been taken, but something had been revealed. Some lines once felt never disappear. They just wait, quietly, for the next time you stand on the edge.